The Awakening on Sanari Prime. In the vast, shimmering expanse of the Sanari Empire, humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial life had long remained a mystery, a shadow in the pages of interstellar exploration logs. But all that changed the moment Ethan Kane opened his eyes in a dimly lit chamber aboard a colossal alien vessel. Dazed and struggling to grasp his surroundings, he felt an ache radiate through his limbs, his head throbbing as if he'd been plucked from Earth's surface and thrust across galaxies in an instant. The chamber he found himself in was unlike anything he'd ever seen, even with his experience as a seasoned space pilot and diplomat. Every wall shimmered, moving like liquid metal, shifting and reforming in soft blue and silver hues. Strange glaze pulsed along the walls in mesmerizing patterns, seemingly alive as they glowed and faded in tandem with his rapid heartbeat. Ethereal lights danced around him, casting elongated shadows across the floor. "Where am I?" he muttered, his voice faint, barely audible. His question was met with an unfamiliar response. A smooth, yet firm voice resonated through the room. "Ethan Kane of Earth," it intoned, each word pronounced with precision. "You have been summoned by Queen Seraphina of the Sanari Prime for an exceptional purpose." The voice carried both authority and an eerie calm, as if the speaker was both intrigued and amused by his confusion. Blinking, Ethan turned to see a tall figure standing in the doorway. Clad in elaborate attire that gleamed in silvery armor, the figure appeared almost humanoid, though distinctly alien. Its skin was a soft, iridescent shade of violet, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, a deep green flecked with gold. A crown-like structure, composed of sleek metallic strands, adorned its head, giving the figure an aura of undeniable power. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice firmer as he fought the fog clouding his thoughts. The figure took a step forward, its gaze penetrating. "I am Commander Lyra of the Exanari Royal Guard. You have been chosen, Ethan Kane, for an alliance that could change the fate of two worlds." Ethan's instincts told him to be cautious, yet he sensed no immediate threat. His pulse steadied as he studied Lyra's face, realizing that her presence, though commanding, did not harbor hostility. "What kind of alliance?" he inquired, his curiosity piqued. Lyra inclined her head, her expression softening as she gestured for him to follow. "Our queen will explain. She has awaited your arrival." Ethan hesitated, but found himself drawn to her words, sensing a deeper purpose awaiting him. He followed her down a series of corridors, each one revealing glimpses of the extraordinary architecture of the ship. Strange, crystalline plants lined the halls, pulsing with an internal light. Alien symbols etched into the floors and ceilings emitted a soft hum, and every step he took seemed to resonate with the rhythm of the ship. Finally, they entered a grand chamber where Queen Seraphina awaited. Her throne was a marvel of otherworldly craftsmanship, made of translucent crystal that seemed to absorb and radiate light simultaneously. She rose as they approached, her figure regal and composed, her attire flowing like liquid metal around her. Queen Seraphina was not what he had expected. Her presence exuded strength, but also a surprising warmth. Her eyes, the same deep green as Lyra's, were intelligent and piercing, yet softened by a faint smile. "Ethan Kane," she said, her voice both musical and commanding. "Welcome to Xanari Prime." Unsure how to respond, he nodded respectfully. "Your Majesty," he replied, his tone steady despite the whirl of emotions within him. Seraphina's gaze never wavered as she continued. "We have observed humanity's resilience, your adaptability, and your curiosity. It is these traits that have brought you here today. You, Ethan, possess the qualities necessary to guide my daughter, Princess Alisara, through the trials of the Xanari." Ethan's brow furrowed as he processed her words. "Guide your daughter? For what purpose?" Seraphina's expression grew solemn. "Our people are at a crossroads. The Xanari must decide if we are to seek alliance with humanity or continue our isolation among the stars. The trials are not merely physical tests, but measures of spirit and determination. Alisara must face these trials, and she will need someone from Earth, like you, to aid her. Ethan took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling over him. He had always yearned for exploration, to understand the cosmos and its mysteries, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. "What if I refuse?" he asked, cautious yet sincere. Seraphina's gaze hardened, a flicker of challenge flashing in her eyes. "You may refuse, Ethan Kane, but if you do, you will be returned to Earth with your memory of these events erased. However, I believe you will not refuse. The desire to understand and to explore runs deep in you." A surge of realization struck Ethan. She was right. This was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, one that could bring humanity closer to understanding its place in the universe. A slow resolve formed within him. "All right," he said, meeting her gaze. "I'll help Princess Alisara, but understand that I don't know what awaits us." Seraphina's lips curved into a slight smile. No one knows what the trials will hold. They shift with each challenger, attuned to the fears and strengths of those who enter them. Alisara will face her deepest vulnerabilities, and you, Ethan, will be there to guide her through them. With a nod from the Queen, Lyra stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of both encouragement and caution. "It will not be easy, Ethan Kane," she murmured, "but you will not be alone." At that moment, the chamber doors swung open, revealing Princess Alisara standing in the doorway. She was tall and graceful, her skin a lighter shade of violet than her mother's, her features sharp and expressive. Her eyes held a fierce determination, but also a guarded vulnerability, as if she carried burdens she was not yet ready to share. Their gazes met, and Ethan felt a strange connection spark between them. She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging him, yet her stance conveyed both curiosity and wariness. "So," Alisara said, her voice clear and confident, "you are the human who will accompany me." "Yes," Ethan replied, sensing the depth of her character immediately. "And you're the one who will lead us both through these trials." Alisara's lips twitched, her eyes brightening with a hint of amusement. "Perhaps we will lead each other. For now, let's see if you can keep up." With that, she turned, gesturing for him to follow, and Ethan found himself drawn into the unfolding mystery of Sci-Fi Prime and the trials that would test them both. Each step forward brought him deeper into an adventure that was not only a test of survival, but an exploration of trust, alliance, and the bridging of two worlds. As he followed her down the passageways of the alien palace, Ethan felt a thrill of anticipation. This was only the beginning, and yet he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The trials of the mind. Ethan followed Princess Alisara down a long corridor, the walls lined with crystalline structures that seemed to hum with an unearthly energy. The closer he got, the stronger the resonance, as if the walls themselves were alive, whispering secrets he couldn't quite understand. Alisara moved confidently, her every step measured and graceful. Despite the tension between them, Ethan couldn't help but be impressed by her presence, which radiated both strength and vulnerability. At the end of the hall, a massive doorway loomed, framed by glowing symbols that pulsed in a rhythmic pattern. Alisara paused before the door, glancing back at Ethan with an expression that was equal parts challenge and caution. "These trials are not like anything you faced on Earth," she warned. "They probe into the mind, stirring memories, fears, and desires. It will feel real, as if you're living through it again." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine, but nodded resolutely. "I understand," he said, though he knew he couldn't fully grasp what lay ahead. "I'm ready." Alisara regarded him for a moment, her gaze searching his face as if to gauge his resolve. Then, with a simple gesture, she placed a hand on a symbol carved into the door. Instantly, the symbols began to glow brighter, casting the room in a surreal, otherworldly light. The door swung open soundlessly, revealing a dark, mist-filled chamber beyond. "This is the Chamber of Reflections," she explained, stepping inside with a quiet confidence. "Each of us will face it alone. The chamber reads your mind, manifesting your greatest fears and memories to test your endurance and will. Ethan swallowed, the weight of her words settling over him. He watched as she took her first steps into the mist, her figure soon swallowed by the darkness. A sense of dread crept into his mind, but he pushed it aside. He was here to prove that humanity was more than capable of meeting the challenges posed by the Xanari. Steeling himself, he stepped forward, the mist swirling around him like cold tendrils as he crossed the threshold into the chamber. The door shut behind him, leaving him in a thick silence that pressed against his skin like a tangible weight. As the fog thickened, his surroundings began to change, shifting and solidifying into something familiar yet distorted. He was no longer in the alien chamber, but standing in the cramped quarters of his childhood home. The dim light, the old wooden furniture, the musty smell, everything was exactly as he remembered, yet the colors were slightly off, like an image faded by time. His heart skipped a beat as he realized he was standing in his mother's kitchen, a place he hadn't seen in years. "Ethan," a soft voice called from behind him. He turned, his breath catching in his throat. His mother stood there, her face just as he remembered, though her eyes held a sorrow he couldn't quite place. She reached out a hand, her expression one of longing and regret. "You left us, Ethan," she murmured, her voice tinged with sadness. "Why didn't you come back?" Ethan's chest tightened as memories flooded his mind. He had left Earth to pursue a career in space exploration, abandoning his family in pursuit of his dreams. It had been years since he'd seen his mother, and guilt gnawed at him, a feeling he had buried beneath layers of duty and ambition. "I'm sorry," he whispered, reaching out to touch her hand, but his fingers passed through hers as if she were a ghost. The image of his mother faded, and the room transformed again. This time, he found himself standing in the cockpit of his old spacecraft, the Argonaut. The control panels flickered with life, and outside the windows, stars stretched across the void. A sense of nostalgia and pride filled him, but it was quickly overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. He remembered this moment. It was the day of the accident. Suddenly, alarms blared, and the cockpit was bathed in red light. A warning flashed on the control panel: engine failure. He tried to reach the controls, but his hands were frozen, immobile, as the ship began to spiral out of control. Panic surged within him as he relived the terror of that day, the helplessness of being trapped in a doomed vessel. "Focus, Ethan," he whispered to himself, willing his mind to break free from the memory. "This isn't real, it's a test." As he fought to calm himself, the scene shifted once more, and he found himself back in the alien chamber, his body trembling from the intensity of the visions. The mist began to thin, and he saw Alisara waiting for him at the far end of the room, her expression unreadable. "You survived the trial of memories," she said, her voice carrying a note of approval. "Not all make it through unscathed." Ethan nodded, his heart still racing as he tried to shake off the lingering effects of the visions. "Is this what it's like for everyone?" Alisara's gaze softened, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. "The chamber shows us our own past, our own fears. It reveals the weaknesses we carry within, forcing us to confront them. Only by facing our inner demons can we become stronger." Ethan met her eyes, seeing a hint of vulnerability beneath her stoic facade. It was clear that she, too, had faced her own fears within the chamber, though she gave no indication of what those fears might be. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice gentle. She hesitated, glancing away as if to shield herself from his gaze. "It's not something I wish to discuss," she replied, her tone clipped, though not unkind. "We have other trials to face, and they will demand our full strength." Ethan respected her silence, sensing that whatever she had faced was deeply personal. He knew better than to press further. Instead, he took a steadying breath and nodded, silently pledging his support for whatever lay ahead. Together, they left the chamber of reflections, the weight of the trial lingering in their steps. As they walked down another dimly lit corridor, Alisara paused, her expression thoughtful. The next trial, she began, will test our unity. It's called the Trial of Harmony, and it requires perfect coordination and trust. Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Trust. Alisara nodded. The trial will place us in a scenario where survival depends on our ability to work as one. The chamber will sense any discord between us and amplify it, creating challenges that will force us to confront our differences. Ethan's mind raced as he considered her words. He and Alisara had only just met, and while they had an understanding, they were far from being in sync. But he knew that if they wanted to succeed, he would have to set aside his own doubts and place his trust in her abilities. As they entered the chamber for the Trial of Harmony, they found themselves in a vast, open space filled with obstacles, towering structures, shifting platforms, and swirling energy fields. The room seemed to pulsate with a life of its own, the walls shifting and changing with each step they took. A voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant. To proceed, you must act as one. Discord will bring you defeat. Harmony will lead to triumph. Alisara glanced at Ethan, her expression unreadable. We'll have to move in unison. Every action, every thought must align. He nodded, understanding the gravity of the trial. Together, they stepped onto a narrow platform that led to a series of shifting steps suspended in midair. As they moved, Ethan felt a strange connection forming between them, a rhythm that synced their movements. It was as if they were part of the same flow, each step mirroring the other. But the trial was far from easy. As they advanced, the obstacles became more complex, testing their coordination and patience. At one point, Ethan stumbled, nearly causing them both to fall. Alisara caught his arm, steadying him, her grip firm and reassuring. Focus, Ethan, she whispered, her voice a reminder of their shared goal. He nodded, regaining his balance and matching her pace. They continued forward, navigating each challenge with a growing sense of unity. The longer they worked together, the more he felt their bonds strengthen, an unspoken understanding forming between them. At last, they reached the end of the chamber, a shimmering doorway awaiting them. They paused, catching their breath, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared triumph. We did it, Ethan said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Alisara allowed herself a small, satisfied nod. We passed the Trial of Harmony. You did well, for a human. Her words held a hint of teasing, and Ethan couldn't help but chuckle. High praise from Xanari, he replied, the tension of the trials easing as they shared a rare moment of camaraderie. But as they stepped through the doorway, the weight of the journey ahead settled over them once more. They had conquered 2 trials, yet the hardest challenges were still to come, lurking in the depths of Xanari Prime. With a sense of determination and newfound trust, they pressed forward, ready to face whatever awaited them next. The Labyrinth of Shadows. The next chamber stretched before Ethan and Alisara, a vast labyrinth cloaked in darkness. Wisps of fog curled along the ground, and an unsettling silence hung in the air. Every corner was shrouded in shadow, the walls shifting with strange, fluid patterns that seemed to change each time Ethan glanced at them. Alisara paused at the entrance, her expression wary. This is the Labyrinth of Shadows, she murmured. It's designed to deceive and confuse, to trap you in your own illusions. Every Xanari knows the labyrinth is dangerous. Once you enter, it feeds on your doubts and fears. Even for those who've survived the earlier trials, many have failed here. Ethan felt a cold prickle of fear, but masked it with a nod. He understood the stakes were only rising with each step. Then we'll need to keep a clear mind, he said, determination threading his voice. No matter what we see, we stay focused. We can't let it get to us. Alisara's gaze softened for a brief moment, and she nodded, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. You're right. Stay close, and remember, what you see and hear may not be real. The labyrinth is notorious for exploiting memories and twisting them into something unrecognizable. They stepped into the labyrinth, the entrance sealing behind them with an echoing thud. Instantly, the air grew colder, and the silence deepened until even their own breathing seemed too loud. Ethan glanced back, but the door had already vanished, replaced by towering walls of dark stone that stretched up and disappeared into the shadows above. They walked in silence, navigating the twists and turns of the maze. The paths seemed endless, each one bleeding into the next with no clear pattern or direction. It felt as if the walls were closing in on them, like the labyrinth was a living, breathing entity watching their every move. After several minutes, Ethan noticed a faint glow on the wall beside him. He stopped, staring at it. The light began to pulse, growing brighter until it took shape, forming into a figure he recognized instantly, his younger sister Lena. Ethan, her voice whispered, echoing through the darkness. He froze, his heart pounding as he took in the sight of her. She looked just as she had the day he'd left Earth, her wide eyes filled with sadness and betrayal. "You promised you'd come back," Lena said, her voice laced with disappointment. "You promised you wouldn't leave me alone." Ethan felt a surge of guilt and pain, memories rushing back in vivid flashes. He'd promised her he'd return, that he wouldn't abandon her. But his duties, his passion for exploration, had pulled him away, and he hadn't been back since. "This isn't real." Alisara's voice cut through the haze, snapping him back to the present. She placed a firm hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "The labyrinth is using your memories against you. Focus, Ethan. Don't let it control you." He blinked, and the vision of Lena faded, the corridor returning to its shadowed stillness. Ethan exhaled shakily, nodding in silent thanks to Alisara. She kept her hand on his shoulder a moment longer, her presence a comforting anchor. They moved on, but the labyrinth seemed to sense their resolve and began to push harder, each corner revealing a new, haunting image from their pasts. Ethan saw fleeting visions of old friends, failed missions, moments he'd buried deep within himself. The shadows twisted these memories, taunting him with flashes of regret and failure, each image designed to shake his confidence and unravel his composure. Alisara was not untouched by the labyrinth's tricks either. At one point, Ethan caught a glimpse of her standing still, her expression strained as she stared at an image only she could see. Her lips parted in a silent plea, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Alisara," he asked gently, concern coloring his voice. She blinked, snapping out of the trance. Her face hardened as she turned away, shaking her head. "It's nothing. Let's keep moving." They pressed onward, their pace slowing as the maze's psychological assault intensified. Each step felt heavier, the weight of their doubts and fears pressing down on them, sapping their energy. But even as the labyrinth tried to pull them apart, they began to rely on each other more, sharing a silent strength as they endured the trial together. At last, they came to a central chamber, a vast, open space with high walls and a single pedestal in the center. Upon the pedestal sat an orb, pulsating with a strange, eerie light. The moment they stepped into the room, the orb began to glow brighter, filling the space with a faint, ethereal hum. "This is the heart of the labyrinth," Alisara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The orb holds the power of the shadows, feeding on our fears to maintain the maze. To escape, we have to dispel it." Ethan approached the pedestal cautiously, studying the orb. Its surface was smooth and dark, swirling with tendrils of shadow that seemed almost alive. He felt a strange pull, as if the orb was drawing him in, sifting through his mind for more fears to exploit. "How do we dispel it?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Alisara's expression was grave as she stepped beside him. "The only way to defeat the orb is to confront the fears it has brought forth, to accept them and release them. If we can acknowledge them without letting them control us, the orb's power will weaken." Ethan took a deep breath, gathering his resolve. He thought of all the visions the labyrinth had shown him, all the regrets and doubts it had dredged up. He allowed himself to feel the pain and sorrow, to accept the mistakes he had made and the people he had let down. Slowly, he let go of the guilt, the self-blame that had weighed on him for so long. As he released these emotions, he felt a strange lightness within him, a freedom that had been absent for years. The orb's glow dimmed, its shadows retracting as it sensed his resolve. Alisara closed her eyes, her expression pained as she faced her own fears. Ethan watched as her shoulders trembled, her face etched with grief and vulnerability. Whatever memories haunted her, they were powerful, and he could see the strain it took for her to confront them. After a moment, she exhaled, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She opened her eyes, and a fierce determination blazed within them. The orb pulsed weakly, its light flickering as her strength added to Ethan's own. Together, they reached out, placing their hands on the orb. The moment their fingers touched its surface, a surge of energy shot through them, and the shadows within the orb began to dissipate, dissolving into wisps of light. The entire chamber shuddered, and the labyrinth began to crumble around them. Walls collapsed, shadows vanished, and the fog lifted, revealing an open pathway leading out of the maze. They stepped back as the orb disintegrated, its fragments scattering like ashes in the wind. For a moment, they stood in silence, breathing heavily, the weight of the ordeal still lingering. But they had conquered the labyrinth, faced their darkest fears, and emerged stronger for it. Ethan turned to Alisara, a newfound respect shining in his eyes. "You faced something painful back there, didn't you?" She nodded slowly, her expression guarded. "We all carry our own burdens, our own regrets. The labyrinth is merciless in exposing them. But I've learned that facing them with someone by your side makes it a little easier." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him at her words. They were allies now, bound by the trials they had endured together, and he knew he would trust her with his life in whatever trials awaited them next. As they left the ruins of the labyrinth behind, they walked side by side, their steps lighter, their hearts a little freer. The dark memories they had confronted would always be a part of them, but now they had the strength to carry them without fear. Ahead, another chamber loomed, its doorway framed by ancient symbols glowing with an ominous red light. Ethan glanced at Alisara, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, her resolve unwavering. "The next trial awaits," she said, her voice steady. "And this time, we face it together." They stepped forward, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead, each one prepared to protect the other in a world where darkness and light danced on the edge of survival. The Trial of Souls. The ominous red light that framed the entrance to the next chamber cast long, eerie shadows along the floor, twisting in unnatural patterns as if alive. Ethan and Alisara stood at the threshold, their breaths synchronized, each silently steeling themselves for what lay ahead. They'd already survived trials of the mind and trust, but there was an undeniable tension in the air, a foreboding sense that this trial would be unlike anything they'd faced before. Alisara's gaze was steady as she regarded the entrance, though Ethan noticed the faintest flicker of hesitation in her eyes. "This trial," she began quietly, "is called the Trial of Souls. It's one of the most dangerous trials in Scenari lore. Few have dared to face it, and even fewer have come out unchanged." Ethan's brow furrowed as he glanced at her. "The Trial of Souls. What does it test?" She hesitated, her gaze distant as if recalling something painful. "It tests the core of who you are, your purpose, your essence. It forces you to confront not just your memories or fears, but the very foundation of your soul. Only those with true conviction and unshakable purpose can hope to survive it." Ethan swallowed, the weight of her words settling over him. He'd always considered himself strong, resilient, but this was a test beyond anything he could have imagined. Yet he felt a surge of determination rise within him. If there was any chance of helping humanity and forming an alliance with the Scenari, he would see this through to the end. With a nod, he stepped forward, entering the chamber. Alisara followed, and the moment they crossed the threshold, the red light intensified, filling the room with a warm, pulsating glow. The door behind them vanished, sealing them in. The room itself was vast, the walls curving upward into a dome that seemed to stretch endlessly. The floor beneath them was smooth and reflective, like polished obsidian, and the entire space had an ethereal quality, as if they were standing between reality and some other dimension. Suddenly, a soft hum filled the air, resonating through the chamber and vibrating within their chests. It was a haunting, melodic sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, slowly, shapes began to materialize in the darkness, translucent figures that floated off the ground, their forms shifting and pulsing like ghostly apparitions. Ethan's breath caught as he took in the sight. There were dozens of them, wisps of light and shadow, each figure distinct yet vaguely human in shape. Their faces were obscured, but he could feel their gaze upon him, cold and penetrating. "These are the shades," Alisara whispered, her voice barely audible. "They are echoes of those who failed the trial of souls. They are bound here, trapped within the chamber for eternity, waiting for others to join them." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine as the shades moved closer, their presence oppressive and suffocating. The temperature dropped, and a cold sweat broke out on his skin as he sensed something sinister lurking within their hollow gazes. Without warning, one of the shades lunged forward, its form shifting as it wrapped around Ethan like a veil of mist. He gasped, feeling an intense pressure in his chest, as if the shade was reaching inside him, probing his very essence. A voice echoed in his mind, cold and detached. "Why do you fight, human? What purpose drives you?" Ethan clenched his jaw, struggling to form a coherent thought under the crushing weight of the shade's presence. Memories flashed before his eyes, moments of pain, regret, loss. The shade seemed to draw on these memories, amplifying his doubts and insecurities, weaving them into a dark tapestry that threatened to consume him. "I fight because I believe in something greater," he managed, his voice strained. "I believe humanity has a place among the stars. I believe we can stand as equals, not conquerors." The shade's grip tightened, the coldness seeping deeper into his mind. Belief is fragile, easily broken. Conviction wavers in the face of true despair. Ethan gritted his teeth, summoning every ounce of his resolve. Maybe. But conviction is also what drives us forward, even when everything else is stripped away. The shade hesitated, its form flickering before it finally released him, dissipating into a cloud of mist. Ethan staggered, gasping for air as he steadied himself. He glanced over at Alisara, who was surrounded by her own shades, each one pressing close, their ethereal forms enveloping her. He could see her lips moving, though he couldn't hear what she was saying. Her face was tense, her brow furrowed as she confronted the shadows of her own past, her own regrets. The shades seemed to be whispering to her, their voices lost in the hum of the chamber. Alisara's expression grew pained, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her usually composed demeanor. One of the shades pressed closer, its face twisted in a semblance of a mocking smile as it whispered something into her ear. Whatever it said caused her to flinch, her hand clenching into a fist as her gaze hardened. "I know who I am," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I may carry my mistakes, my failures, but they do not define me. I choose my own path, my own destiny. I will not be bound by my past." The shades surrounding her recoiled, their forms flickering as if disrupted by her defiance. One by one, they faded, dissipating into the darkness until only she remained, standing alone and unshaken. Ethan felt a surge of admiration for her strength, for the courage it took to face such a trial. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could speak, the chamber shifted, the floor beneath them rippling like water. A new figure materialized before them, larger and more defined than the shades. This one was no wisp of mist, but a towering cloaked figure with a face obscured by shadows. Its eyes glowed with an intense, unsettling light, and a palpable aura of authority radiated from its form. "You have both faced your fears, but the trial is far from over," the figure intoned, its voice deep and resonant. "To pass the trial of souls, you must confront the essence of your souls. Step forward and reveal your true purpose." Ethan exchanged a glance with Alisara, and she nodded, her expression calm and unwavering. Together, they approached the figure, their footsteps echoing through the chamber. The figure extended a hand, and the space around them transformed. Ethan found himself standing alone in a barren wasteland, the ground cracked and desolate, the sky a dark, swirling mass of clouds. He felt a strange heaviness, as if something was weighing him down, pulling him toward the earth. Suddenly, figures began to emerge from the shadows, people he recognized, friends, family, mentors, all staring at him with expressions of disappointment and anger. "You left us," one of them accused, then a voice echoing in his mind. "You abandoned us for your own selfish goals." Ethan's heart pounded as he faced their accusations, the guilt he carried for so long rising to the surface. He had left them, choosing his path over those he loved, pursuing a dream that had taken him far from home. But he took a deep breath, grounding himself. "I did leave," he admitted, his voice steady. "But I did it because I believed in something greater. I wanted to make a difference, to be part of something bigger than myself. I may have made mistakes, but I will not regret choosing to follow my purpose." The figures wavered, their anger softening, their expressions shifting into something resembling acceptance. One by one, they faded, leaving Ethan standing alone in the wasteland, his heart lighter, his mind clearer. The scene dissolved, and he found himself back in the chamber, standing beside Alisara. Her gaze was intense, her expression resolute. She'd faced her own trial, and like him, she had emerged stronger for it. The cloaked figure nodded, a faint glimmer of approval in its shadowed eyes. "You have passed the trial of souls," it said. "Your purpose is strong, your conviction unwavering. You are worthy of the path you have chosen." With a final gesture, the figure faded into the darkness, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The chamber brightened, and a door appeared at the far end, its golden light inviting them forward. Ethan felt a rush of relief, a sense of triumph, tempered by the gravity of what they had just endured. He turned to Alisara, his eyes meeting hers in silent acknowledgement. "We made it," he said, his voice soft yet filled with respect. She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "Yes, and was stronger for it." Together, they stepped through the doorway, leaving the trial of souls behind. As they walked, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of himself and his mission. They had faced their darkest selves, and now they were ready for whatever lay ahead, their souls unburdened and their spirits unbreakable. But as they moved into the next corridor, a quiet voice echoed in Ethan's mind, a reminder of the journey still to come. This was only the beginning. The Forge of Unity. The golden-lit corridor led Ethan and Alisara deeper into the heart of the Zanari Palace, the air growing warmer, infused with a faint metallic scent. They walked in silence, each lost in thought, the weight of the previous trials heavy on their minds. The trial of souls had been harrowing, yet it had left them with a sense of shared understanding, a bond forged in the fires of vulnerability and self-discovery. At the end of the corridor, they came upon an enormous set of double doors, embossed with intricate designs that shimmered like molten silver. The symbols glowed faintly, their patterns resembling constellations, as if each symbol was a star marking the night sky. Alisara turned to Ethan, her gaze steady. "This next trial is known as the Forge of Unity. It's a test of endurance and cohesion, a challenge that requires both physical and mental strength, but above all, trust." Ethan raised an eyebrow, feeling a mixture of intrigue and caution. What exactly does this trial entail? Alisara hesitated, her expression thoughtful. The forge is unpredictable. Each pair that enters faces a unique ordeal crafted specifically to test the strength of their bond. It adapts to expose any cracks in our unity, magnifying them until we either overcome them or are broken by them. Ethan nodded, his pulse quickening at the thought. "So we face it together, no matter what happens." She offered him a small smile, a glimmer of warmth breaking through her usual stoic demeanor. "Yes, whatever we encounter, we face it as one. With a shared glance of determination, they pressed their hands against the doors, which swung open with a deep rumble. Heat washed over them as they stepped into the chamber, a vast expanse illuminated by the glow of molten metal. Rivers of molten liquid, pulsing with an otherworldly light, flowed through channels carved into the floor, casting a warm, fiery glow across the room. At the center of the chamber stood a massive forge, an ancient construct crafted from dark, heat-resistant stone and adorned with strange glyphs that pulsed with a deep, rhythmic energy. Around the forge, several pillars rose from the ground, each one wrapped in coils of metal that shimmered in the intense heat. A voice boomed through the chamber, resonant and powerful, carrying an almost sentient quality. "Welcome to the Forge of Unity. Here, strength alone will not carry you. Only by joining your minds, your wills, and your spirits will you withstand the trial." As the voice faded, the forge flared to life, and a ring of flames ignited around the room's perimeter, trapping them within. The ground beneath them trembled, and from the molten rivers emerged strange, elemental creatures, beings of fire and metal, their forms twisting and reshaping as they moved. They had no defined faces, only hollow, glowing eyes that locked onto Ethan and Alisara with an unsettling intensity. Ethan tightened his grip on the hilt of his weapon, instinctively taking a defensive stance. "So we're supposed to fight these things together." Alisara nodded, her own blade drawn, her stance poised. "They're testing our unity. The creatures will attack us separately, attempting to divide us. But if we falter, if we allow ourselves to be isolated, we'll fail the trial." They positioned themselves back to back, forming a unified front as the creatures advanced. The first one lunged at Ethan, its fiery limbs slicing through the air like molten blades. He parried the strike, feeling the intense heat radiating from its body as he deflected its attack. A second creature lunged toward Alisara, its metal-infused arms crashing down with a force that sent sparks flying. "Stay close." Alisara shouted over the roar of the flames, her voice filled with urgency. "If we're separated, they'll overwhelm us." Ethan nodded, his movements mirroring hers as they fell into a rhythm, their strikes and defenses seamlessly coordinated. The creatures attacked relentlessly, each one attempting to wedge itself between them, to push them apart. But they held their ground, their movements synchronized as they countered each assault, their backs pressed together, each one protecting the other's blind spots. For what felt like an eternity, they fought in perfect harmony, their combined strength and focus keeping the creatures at bay. But the trial was far from over. The elemental beings seemed to sense their resolve, their movements becoming more erratic, their forms shifting into new and unpredictable shapes. Some sprouted multiple limbs, while others morphed into serpentine figures, coiling around them in an attempt to entangle and ensnare. As one of the creatures lunged forward, Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline as he slashed through it, his blade cleaving its fiery form in half. But in that moment of victory, he realized his mistake. The creature's split body reformed, its two halves now acting independently as they attacked him from both sides. Alisara turned, sensing his struggle. "Ethan, don't lose focus," she warned, her tone sharper than before. She lunged forward, her blade slicing through one of the creatures that had cornered him. For a brief moment, they faltered, their rhythm disrupted. The creatures pressed in, exploiting the gap in their unity, and one of them struck Ethan, its fiery limb raking across his arm. He bit back a cry of pain as the intense heat seared his skin, a blistering agony spreading through his arm. "Ethan." Alisara's voice was filled with concern as she fought off the advancing creatures, trying to reach him. "I'm fine," he grunted, forcing himself to focus despite the pain. He steadied himself, meeting her gaze with determination. "We can't let them divide us. Let's focus, together." She nodded, her eyes hardening with resolve. They tightened their formation, moving in perfect unison as they countered the creature's every move. With each swing of their blades, they found their rhythm once more, their movements precise and unbreakable. As the creatures pressed in, Ethan felt an unexpected sensation, a strange, almost telepathic connection forming between him and Alisara. He could sense her movements, her thoughts, her intentions as if they were his own. It was as if their minds had synchronized, merging into a single cohesive force. The connection between them grew stronger, and with it, their movements became even more fluid, their attacks perfectly timed, their defenses impenetrable. The creatures seemed to sense this change, their aggression faltering as they found themselves unable to breach their unity. For the first time, Alisara smiled, a glint of triumph in her eyes. "We're doing it, Ethan. We're becoming one." He grinned, the pain in his arm forgotten as they fought side by side, their bond solidified in the heat of battle. With a final surge of energy, they drove the creatures back, their combined strength overwhelming the last of the elemental beings, which dissolved into clouds of ash and smoke, leaving the chamber silent once more. As the creatures vanished, the flames around the room extinguished, and the forge dimmed, its molten light fading into darkness. The voice echoed through the chamber once more, its tone filled with approval. "You have passed a forge of unity. Your bond is true, your unity unbreakable. Together, you are stronger than the sum of your parts." Ethan and Alisara stood in the silence, breathing heavily, their bodies bruised and exhausted, but their spirits lifted. They had passed the trial not through strength alone, but through their trust in each other, their willingness to fight as one. Ethan turned to Alisara, his expression filled with admiration. "We make a pretty good team," he said, his voice light but sincere. She met his gaze, a rare softness in her eyes. "Yes, we do," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "I didn't think it was possible for someone from Earth to understand our trials, to stand with me as an equal. But you've proven me wrong, Ethan." He felt a warmth spread through him at her words, a sense of pride and camaraderie. They were no longer just allies thrown together by circumstance. They were partners, bound by trust and respect. As they made their way out of the chamber, the double doors opened to reveal a winding staircase leading upward, illuminated by the soft glow of crystalline sconces. They climbed in silence, each lost in thought, yet acutely aware of the other's presence beside them. When they reached the top, they found themselves standing before a grand hall, its walls lined with murals depicting scenes of Senari history and ancient legends. At the far end of the hall stood a throne, and upon it sat Queen Seraphina, her regal form framed by shimmering tapestries of blue and silver. She rose as they approached, her gaze fixed upon them, her expression a mixture of pride and curiosity. "You have both proven yourselves in the trials," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength. "You have faced your fears, your doubts, and have emerged as one. The bond you have forged is rare and precious." Ethan felt a surge of anticipation as he met the Queen's gaze. "We've come this far because we believe in the possibility of an alliance, a future where our worlds stand together. We're ready to prove that humanity is worthy of that trust." Queen Seraphina nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Your journey is far from over, but you have taken the first steps towards something greater. You have shown the Gazanari that strength lies not in isolation, but in unity." She turned to Alisara, her gaze filled with maternal pride. "You have done well, my daughter. You have proven yourself not only as a warrior, but as a leader." Alisara inclined her head, a glimmer of emotion flickering in her eyes. "Thank you, Mother. I could not have done it alone." The Queen's gaze softened, and she extended a hand toward Ethan and Alisara. "Together, you represent the best of both our worlds. You have my blessing to continue this journey, to explore the depths of this alliance, and to face whatever trials may come." With a final nod, Queen Seraphina dismissed them, and they turned to leave the hall, their steps filled with renewed purpose. They had overcome the forge of unity, forged a bond that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. And though the path before them remained uncertain, they knew they would face it together, as allies, as partners, as friends. As they stepped out into the cool night air of Senari Prime, the stars stretching across the sky like a sea of endless possibility, Ethan felt a strange sense of peace, a certainty that he had found his place among the stars, and with it, a new purpose that would guide him wherever this journey would lead.